The alien queen expected him to bow. That was her first mistake. As the towering crystalline doors of her throne hall split open, casting a cold violet glow across the polished obsidian floor, Commander Rian Holt walked forward with the battered calm of a man who had seen too many worlds burn and refused to let Earth be one of them. He didn't flinch at the jagged spears of the Kryalzan Royal Guard, or at the thousand eyes glaring from the balcony above. He certainly didn't flinch when the Queen herself, fate feet of armored elegance, crowned with spined tendrils that shimmered with iridescent venom, leaned forward on her throne of living chitin and smiled with rows of perfect crystalline fangs. "A human," she purred, the word dripping disdain. "Your leaders send this little creature to negotiate surrender. Your species grows more amusing by the day." Rian stopped at the center of the hall, boots echoing like defiance, and met her glowing violet eyes. "I'm not here to surrender," he said simply. She laughed, a musical, cutting sound that washed over her court like a wave of mockery. "Not here to surrender," she repeated, gesturing lazily with one clawed hand. "Then you are here to die." The guards raised their weapons. The Queen lounged back, bored already. "I tire of insects who forget their place. Kill him." But Rian didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even loosen his shoulders. Instead, he said with a calm that silenced even the guards, "You're underestimating the wrong species." The Queen paused, amused. "Bold," she purred, "and profoundly stupid." The guards stepped forward, but Rian raised a single hand. Not in surrender, not in fear, just enough for every warrior in that throne room to feel the shift in the air, the tension, the readiness, like a man who had stood in front of firing squads and orbital bombardments and lived through all of it. "Before you try to kill me," he said, "you should know something." The Queen arched an eyebrow ridge. "And what is that?" "You're not invading Earth," Rian said. "Not while I'm alive." The Queen threw her head back and laughed again, louder, crueler. "One man cannot stop a fleet of 40,000 warships. One man cannot stand against a species bred for war. One man cannot." She stopped, because the floor beneath her throne trembled, faintly, then again, like distant thunder. Her guards shifted uneasily. Rian didn't smile. Too many of his friends had died for him to ever enjoy theatrics. But his eyes hardened with something the Kryalzan were not used to seeing in prey. "I didn't come here alone," he said quietly. And at that exact moment, the sky outside the throne hall flashed white, then red, then searing gold as an explosion rocked the entire royal citadel. The Queen leaped from her throne, eyes blazing. "What have you done?" she roared. Rian didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the next explosion came from beneath the palace. The Kryalzan court erupted in chaos. Warriors shouted, scrambling for their hover formations. The Queen hissed orders that were drowned out by the shriek of alarms across the capital city. Through the towering windows of the throne hall, Rian saw streaks of fire rising from the planet's surface and here, batteries shooting up toward, figures diving through the atmosphere. Not ships, not drones, human drop pods, hundreds of them. "Your defenses should have caught them," the Queen spat, rounding on him, venom shining at the edges of her fangs. "They were scrambled," Rian said, "by a virus built into your own fleet's communication spine." He shrugged. "You should patch your firewalls more often." The Queen hissed, enraged, but Rian kept talking. "Your orbiting cruisers, offline, not destroyed, just sleeping. Your palace shields, overloaded from inside your own grid. Your elite battalions." He nodded toward the distant thunder of combat echoing through the city. "Busy, impossible," she snarled. "Humans lack the neural capacity for such sabotage." "Humans," Rian said, stepping closer, "lack nothing. You just don't understand the lengths we go when someone threatens our home." His calm earpiece crackled, a faint whisper under the roar of battle. "Strike teams Omega, Delta, and Sigma in position. We've breached the reactor. 2 minutes until detonation lockdown." The Queen heard it too. Her eyes widened. "You dare sabotage the royal core." "I warned you," Rian said quietly. "Earth isn't surrendering." The Queen lunged, impossibly fast, but Rian moved first. Humans were slow compared to most species, physically weaker, easier to kill, but Rian Holt was something the galaxy never understood until it was too late. Trained, prepared, and utterly fearless. He ducked under her sweeping claws, rolled across polished obsidian, grabbed a fallen guard's blade, and redirected another warrior's spear into his comrade's armor, seam in a single motion. The hall descended into violence, But Rian was already calculating, already moving, striking only when he needed to, conserving breath, conserving pain. He'd grown accustomed to fighting species stronger than him. You survive by knowing when not to fight. The queen roared, her wings snapping open in a burst of iridescent light, and slammed into him with enough force to break ribs. Rion hit a pillar hard, vision blurring. She stalked toward him, height casting him in shadow. "You think your little sabotage will save your world," she growled. "My fleets span 30 systems. You are but a momentary inconvenience." Rian wiped blood from his mouth. "Funny," he said, struggling to his feet. "That's what the Vorth said, and the Hazard Dominion. But humans don't stay inconvenient. We become problems." She hissed and sprinted toward him, but Rion didn't brace. He didn't prepare for a fight. He activated the signal on his gauntlet. A pulse shot through the throne hall. The Kryles and guards froze as their armor locked, their weapons deactivated, their artificial muscle fibers seizing. Only the queen, with her pure biological form, remained unaffected. She looked around in outrage. "You hacked royal armor binders." "No," Rian said. "We built your armor binders 15 years ago." Confusion flickered across her face. "Human engineers," Rian added. "We've been selling you tech since before you even knew what Earth was." And that finally made the queen afraid. For the first time since he'd entered the hall, the smug calm drained from her features. Her fangs glimmered with uncertainty. Rian straightened, breathing slow and deliberate. "Humanity didn't start this war," he said, "but we will finish it." The queen lashed out, pure instinct now, her claws slicing the air where his head had just been. Rian ducked, rolled, grabbed a fallen plasma pistol, and fired once, twice, 3 times each shot, precise, targeting joints, tendons, nerve nodes. The queen staggered but didn't fall. Krylzen were built for war, built to take punishment that would pulp a human. But she was also furious, reckless, and that was her weakness. Rian had fought beings like her before, leaders, blinded by their own superiority. She charged again. This time he sidestepped smoothly, letting her momentum carry her into a support pillar that cracked under her weight. He didn't smile, but he did say, "That was for mocking humans." Then his cum clicked again. "Commander, reactor override, successful. Fleet carriers beginning atmospheric descent. Your orders." Rion pressed a hand to his earpiece, never taking his eyes off the queen. "Initiate Operation Holdback." The queen lunged at him with a scream of fury, but she never reached him. The citadel trembled, then shuddered violently as something enormous cast a shadow through the throne hall windows. A human command carrier, one of Earth's orbital fortress-class vessels, descended from the sky like a falling mountain, engines burning white-hot as it hovered above the city. The queen stared upward, frozen. Rian didn't waste the moment. He strode forward until he stood directly beneath the falling light of the carrier. "You wanted humanity's surrender," he said softly. "Instead, you get me." Outside, thousands of human soldiers descended onto the capital. The invasion of Earth had been halted before it began, and the queen who had mocked the lone human who dared stand in her throne room finally understood her mistake. She had underestimated a species that didn't know how to quit. Arik stood in chains before the throne of Queen Varash, though the chains were mostly ceremonial. The Veskari had not yet figured out how to forge metal strong enough to reliably contain a human. His wrists were bound with obsidian links that shimmered with defensive runes, each glowing faintly with alien light. But even as they pulsed, he could feel them weakening, as if reacting to his mere presence. The queen lounged upon her throne of black metal and thorned crystal, a living monument to a millennium of conquest. Smoke drifted from braziers shaped like screaming faces, and long banners stitched with the blood of rival species hung like trophies behind her. Varash studied him with cold amusement, her voice a silken threat as she circled the platforms, tails swaying in predatory rhythm. She mocked him before her court, taunting the lone human who had slaughtered her forward strike regiment. "You are a curious creature," she purred, her fanged smile sharp as a blade. "Small, soft, barely armored, yet you stand here with the arrogance of a warlord." She paused, tapping a claw against the obsidian collar around his throat, though even she noticed the runes flickering as if uncertain. "Tell me, human, how did you kill my commander?" Arik did not answer. He simply raised his chin, meeting her gaze without flinching. The silence itself unsettled the court, because among the Veskari only the strongest dared refuse a queen's question. That was when Varash laughed, loud and delighted, the sound echoing through the vast throne chamber. "He thinks he is strong," she announced to her generals, whose armor glowed fiercely beneath the throne's light. "He thinks his species can fight mine." Her warriors hissed with mockery, claws scraping stone. But Arik merely breathed evenly, studying the exits, mapping the guard rotations, counting the heartbeat of every alien within striking distance. His mind wasn't quiet. Humans never had been simple, instinct-driven animals like the Viscari believed. His species had learned to adapt, to improvise, to think sideways, and though he was captured, though he was surrounded by thousands, he didn't feel defeated. He felt patient. Varash motioned for her attendants to bring forth a display pedestal, a holographic slab of shimmering crimson light. When it activated, the galaxy unfurled before them, a map of burning systems and ruptured orbital stations. "This," she declared with triumphant pride, "is what my invasion will accomplish. 15 human colonies fall within the first month. Your fleets are scattered. Your worlds are ripe. Humanity is outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. If you surrender now, I may leave survivors." She leaned forward, her eyes glowing like twin suns. "I want to see what your species becomes in captivity." Arik watched the projection of human worlds burning, watched cities he had trained in crumble, watched ships built by hands he once knew crack apart under alien fire. His jaw tightened, but not with fear. Humans were strange in that way. Despair only made them more dangerous. The Queen saw something shift in his gaze, something she had not expected. A spark that didn't die, a flame that couldn't be crushed. "You think this changes anything?" he said finally, and his voice was calm, too calm for someone in chains. "It changes everything," she hissed. "Your kind is finished." "No," Arik said. "It means humanity finally knows who to fight." Something cold slid through the room. Varash snarled, snapping orders for the guards to strike him. But before they could move, the chains binding him cracked. A single hairline fracture. The obsidian links trembled. A ripple of unease skittered through the throne chamber. Warriors tensed, unsure whether to rush forward or retreat. Arik didn't move. He didn't need to. That crack meant everything. Obsidian restraints were designed to hold beasts that could crush starship hulls. Yet a human, sitting still, had just fractured one, using nothing but the tension in his muscles. Varash approached slowly now, suspicion replacing amusement. "You have been enhanced," she accused, her voice a low rumble. "No," Arik said, "I've just been trained." She studied him longer this time, really studied him, and only then did she realize something the Viscari had never understood about humans. They fought like prey species until the moment they didn't, until the moment they stopped running, turned around, and became something else entirely. "Increase security," she snapped. "Double guard patrols, and bring him to the arena of shattered crowns. If the human wants to resist, let him entertain us before he dies." The arena was a colosseum carved into the heart of the palace, forged from broken armored plates of conquered kings. Tens of thousands gathered as Arik was dragged below. Though only a handful of guards dared approach him closely, they chained him against fresh restraints made of heavier obsidian, reinforced with pulsating runes, but even these seemed to weaken as they touched human skin, as if refusing to hold him. In the center of the arena, the Queen addressed the roaring crowd. "Today," she declared, "we witness the breaking of humanity's final hope. This soldier stands alone, no weapons, no armor, only flesh, against my finest champion." A gate opened with a booming crash. The champion lumbered out, a towering Viscari, war beast, bred for gladiatorial slaughter, its 4 arms clutching plasma axes the size of Arik's torso. The creature roared, the sound powerful enough to rattle the stone beneath their feet. Arik rolled his shoulders once and exhaled. He still wore chains. The crowd noticed this. Varash noticed it too, but she didn't stop the fight. She wanted him humiliated, wanted the galaxy to see humanity broken. The champion charged. The ground cracked under its weight. Arik stood perfectly still until the last possible instant, then shifted his weight, letting the beast overshoot by inches. The crowd gasped. The Queen's eyes narrowed. The champion roared again, swinging an axe that could cleave a tank in half. Arik moved like liquid fire. Humans weren't stronger, weren't faster, weren't built for war the same way the Viscari were. But they had one advantage no other species understood. They learned, with every heartbeat, with every failure, with every attack. In 3 seconds, Arik understood the champion's footwork, its balance, its breathing rhythm. In 5, he learned how its axis carried momentum. In 7, he knew how to kill it. The next time the giant charged, he sidestepped, letting the chains on his wrists wrap around one of the beast's axes. He pulled not with brute strength, but with timing, and the monster stumbled, its own momentum betraying it. The chain snapped in the process. Metal fragments scattered like sparks. The crowd fell silent. Arik didn't pause. He used the broken chain like a whip, snapping it across the champion's eye, blinding it. The beast howled and swung wildly, but Arik was already climbing its arm, using the armored ridges like ladder rungs, and before the monster could adjust, he wrapped the remaining chain around its throat. With a twist, a torque, and a drop behind its shoulders, he pulled. The beast fell, and did not rise again. Silence spread through the arena like frost. Then a single whisper. Human. Varash rose slowly from her elevated balcony. For the first time, she looked uncertain, not afraid but thoughtful. Interesting, she murmured. Very interesting. Arik stood in the center of the arena, chest heaving, covered in dust and fragments of alien armor. He stared up at the queen, his expression unreadable. I told you, he said quietly enough, that only she could hear through the amplifiers. I'm not here to surrender. Varish waved her hand, ordering the guards to retrieve him. But when the guards approached, they hesitated. 2 stepped forward, then 1, then none. Not because they feared him, but because they feared disappointing their queen if they failed. That was when she noticed the deeper truth. Viscari warriors had always believed themselves the pinnacle of creation, but this human had killed their champion while shackled. If she couldn't break him, the myth of her invincibility would crack. She forced her voice to remain steady as she said, "Take him back to the dungeons. Strengthen the restraints. I want him alive." But when she turned away, there was something new behind her eyes. Doubt. In the lower corridors, far from the arena, Arik walked between guards who refused to meet his eyes. Not out of shame, but respect. That was the moment he knew his plan was working. Not the escape. He could do that any time. No, Arik needed something more important. He needed the Viscari to question themselves. Humans didn't win wars through numbers or brute force. They won by changing the battlefield, changing the enemy. And now, even the queen was second-guessing what he truly was. As the dungeon door slammed shut behind him, Arik tested his new restraints, reinforced, runes glowing brightly, strong enough to hold a battleship's thrusters in place. They still trembled when he flexed. He smiled, not because breaking them would be easy, but because he needed them to think it might not be. Let them wonder, let them fear the unknown, let them whisper the word they never thought to apply to a human. Unbreakable. Upstairs, in the quiet of her private chambers, Queen Varash stared at her own reflection, troubled by something she had never felt before. For centuries, she had mocked the weak, feasted on the hopeless, ruled through fear. But now an image kept returning to her mind, a lone human, standing in the dust, looking up at her without fear, without defeat, without submission. An enemy who would not bend, an enemy she could not crush. And though she would never admit it aloud, part of her wondered if she'd just witnessed the beginning of her own downfall. The following hours stretched into a tense, suffocating rhythm that seemed to warp time itself. Arik moved quietly through the labyrinthine corridors of the Viscari citadel, shackles clinking lightly as he tested their resilience. He had been returned to a cell designed for the largest of their warriors, a vault reinforced with layered obsidian, psychic dampeners, and kinetic barriers meant to break anyone who tried to resist. Yet the moment he leaned against the wall, he could feel the faint hum of the energy field pulse, responding to the strength of his will, and a sly, private satisfaction crept into his chest. The queen, high above in her throne room, was convening her generals to discuss what to do next. But Arik had already begun weaving a plan that no amount of strategy or fleet deployment could counter. He studied the guard rotations, memorized the patrol intervals, and noted every point where a weak seam in the prison's design revealed itself. Humans, he knew, survived because they paid attention to the details no one else noticed. While the Viscari marveled at their own power, Arik exploited the subtleties they ignored, the slight lag between the energy pulses and their regenerative feedback, the way certain stones in the floor expanded when exposed to heat, the manner in which the psychic dampeners could be overloaded with a concentrated burst of thought. Hours turned into what felt like minutes, and then Arik tested the chains. One wrist slipped a fraction, not enough to escape, but enough to confirm that the runes, the metal, the psychic coils, everything they used to hold him, was not absolute. He smiled faintly. That was all he needed. Above him, the Queen roared orders, as if her fury alone could keep him contained. She sent waves of soldiers down the corridors, squads of 4 to 6 at a time, all augmented with cybernetic limbs and psychic implants, each trained to subdue any living thing that dared resist. Arik welcomed them. Each arrival was a chance to test his timing, his instincts, his endurance. He moved swiftly, slipping between attacks, using walls and support beams as leverage, using the momentum of his captors against them, each motion precise, fluid, and calculated. They learned nothing from the encounter. He never struck the same way twice. By the end of the night, he had left dozens of soldiers incapacitated in small piles across the corridors, bruised, humiliated, but alive. He was careful. Killing was unnecessary. Psychological impact mattered more. By dawn, news of the human who had fought the elite squads without weapons and chains had spread throughout the citadel, whispering down corridors, filtering up to the Queen herself. Varash's violet eyes narrowed as she observed the empty patrol corridors and the ragged soldiers returning to report their failures. One by one, even her trusted lieutenants came to her, reluctant, uneasy, and all said the same thing. He was impossible. Arik had become more than a soldier. He was an idea, a shadow of unpredictability that the Viscari had no framework to understand. She had mocked humans, dismissed them as weak, as fragile, as inconsequential, but here was proof that her assumptions were flawed, and she hated it. She seethed, pacing her chamber, tail lashing behind her in anger, spines bristling as she considered how one human could defy all logic. By midday, she sent her personal envoy, an armored monstrosity called the Mindblade, a telepathic warrior capable of anticipating movements before they happened. Arik had anticipated this. When the Mindblade arrived, its psychic probe brushed against his consciousness like a cold, probing storm, seeking weaknesses, hunting thought patterns. Arik's mind met it, and instead of retreating, he projected a calm, unyielding barrier, channeling focus into mental countermeasures learned over decades of combat and survival training. The Mindblade recoiled, momentarily shocked, and before it could adjust, Arik struck, lightning fast, precise, and cruelly efficient. He disarmed it, twisted its own body against the walls, and left it incapacitated, gasping in disbelief. And as he watched it collapse, Arik understood something vital. The Viscari believed in inevitability. They trusted their fleets, their numbers, their psychic dominance. Humanity's strength was exactly the opposite. They created inevitability out of chaos, turning disadvantage into an advantage with cleverness, speed, and sheer stubbornness. The cell corridors became his hunting ground, the castle his chessboard, and every guard, every soldier, every officer, a piece he could manipulate, divert, or neutralize without needing to kill them. Word reached the Queen again, carried on the terrified whispers of her soldiers. She felt it like a chill in her blood. The human moved with impossible efficiency. He did not flee. He did not panic. He fought, survived, and adapted. And the more he adapted, the more the citadel itself seemed to bend to his will. Varash clenched her claws, sending forth her most elite soldiers, the Shock Talons, lightning-quick warriors with psychic amplifiers built into their neural links. They descended on him in perfect synchronization, blades glinting, psionic tendrils rippling, expecting the human to falter. But Arik had already anticipated their approach. He ducked under the first attack, flipped over a guard's back, twisted mid-air, and sent another into a wall. Using the length of a corridor, he ricocheted off surfaces, dodged beams of energy, and, with precise timing, hurled a stone slab that knocked the psychic conduit out of the leader of the Talons, disrupting the neural network of the others. Chaos erupted in perfect synchronization. By the time the dust settled, Arik stood alone, unharmed, in the middle of the hallway, chest heaving, bruised, bloodied, but in complete control. Each encounter only heightened his legend among the soldiers whispered in terrified awe, generals muttered curses, and even the Queen's pride twisted into apprehension. She had mocked him, sent fleets, trained warriors, and unleashed her champions, but one human, small, fragile, mortal, was undoing her empire from within, piece by piece, corridor by corridor. Arik understood the game. It was psychological, it was patience, it was endurance, and it was far more effective than any weapon or ship. He did not yet have to destroy the Queen's fleet. He only had to make her doubt herself. He had seen empires collapse from within, from the smallest crack in confidence, and he knew that fear was the most potent weapon of all. The next stage of his plan required him to reach the command nexus, a chamber deep within the citadel where the Queen's telemetric arrays linked her entire fleet. Every step forward was a dance, avoiding patrols, bypassing traps, and testing the strength of every chain still around his wrists and ankles. By nightfall, he had neutralized an entire battalion assigned to the task of guarding the nexus, moving like a shadow, silent and deliberate, leaving only whispers of his presence behind. He paused briefly in the upper galleries, looking out at the alien city sprawled beneath the citadel. Lights burned, ships hung in orbit, and the sky above was filled with the distant glow of approaching human fleets. They were on time, they were synchronized. Humanity had only sent one soldier to accomplish what no fleet could disrupt, disorient, and break the confidence of a superior enemy. Arik allowed himself a brief moment of pride. He had been trained for this not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a soldier. And soldiers understood one principle above all else: adapt, survive, overcome. The nexus doors loomed ahead. Psychic seals flickered with light. Mechanical locks clicked in layers upon layers. And Arik, alone and unarmed, save for his wits and the minor tools he had scavenged from his prison, began dismantling them, one methodical, precise movement at a time. When the final seal cracked, the entire chamber pulsed in warning. Alarms screamed through the citadel. Varash roared from above, fury unmatched in its history. He has reached the nexus. Stop him. Kill him before he destroys everything. But the Queen had underestimated one final factor. Arik had learned her patterns. He moved faster than her orders could propagate, faster than her troops could react. He entered the control room. Panels of alien technology glowed in unison, feeds from the entire fleet flickering across holographic displays. He didn't hesitate. He didn't waste time, fingers flying over the alien interface. He redirected targeting protocols, disabled automated weapon nodes, looped communications to send false signals back to the Veskari fleet. Chaos erupted simultaneously on multiple fronts. The Queen screamed through comm channels, demanding explanation, but every attempt to regain control was met with failure. Every system she tried to manipulate had been subtly subverted by a single human, operating at peak efficiency, exploiting the same arrogance that had allowed him to enter her inner sanctum undetected. Soldiers outside attempted to breach the chamber, but even they faltered when their own weapons misfired, shields overloaded, and psychic channels short-circuited under Arik's rapid modifications. The Queen, watching in disbelief, realized her empire at least temporarily was at the mercy of one human soldier who had mocked probability itself. And in that realization, she understood something terrifying. She had never truly underestimated humans before. She had dismissed them, ignored them, considered them fragile, weak, and irrelevant. But here, now, in the heart of her fortress, one human had demonstrated a quality the Veskari could never engineer: ingenuity, adaptability, and the sheer audacity to fight where no one else dared. Arik stood alone amidst the humming nexus, chains broken, hands steady, eyes scanning every display as he orchestrated what the Veskari could not comprehend. And in the Queen's eyes, for the first time, there was uncertainty. That uncertainty was more dangerous than any weapon, more potent than any fleet, more lethal than any psychic amplifier. The tide had turned. Humanity had not yet fired a single shot from orbit, yet one human had already achieved what years of intelligence gathering and fleet maneuvering could not. He had sown doubt, disrupted the chain of command, and demonstrated that no matter how vast the Veskari Empire, a single, unbreakable human could hold it at bay. The Queen's roar echoed through the citadel, trembling walls, shattering the silence that had momentarily fallen, but even she knew it was only a sound, a gesture of rage against inevitability, not a reversal of fate. Arik smiled faintly, not from pride, but from understanding. One human could not end an empire, at least not alone, but one human could make an empire hesitate, stumble, and, if precise enough, fail. And tonight, he had done exactly that. Arik's fingers danced across the alien consoles, not in panic, not in desperation, but with the precise, calm rhythm of a man who had faced annihilation and chosen to turn it into opportunity. Every command he issued, every system he rerouted, every sensor he hacked was a calculated strike. A chess move in a game the Veskari had never considered humans capable of playing. Outside the citadel, their fleet responded to his subtle manipulations. Bombers were misdirected, shields overloaded, and communications looped into endless recursive cycles, causing confusion so deep that Veskari captains began issuing conflicting orders, firing upon one another, and retreating into defensive formations that no human would have expected to need to hold. Inside, the queen paced her throne room with visible agitation, her wings flicking like a storm, eyes blazing with fury, but she could not intervene fast enough. Every attempt to regain control was countered before it could take effect. Her elite soldiers, telepathic enforcers, and psychic champions faltered as Arik exploited every crack in their discipline, exploiting arrogance, impatience, and the rigid structure of their command chains. The citadel shook as explosions rocked the lower levels. Sabotage from infiltrators coordinated by Arik and timed with surgical precision destroyed power conduits, collapsed corridors, and immobilized reinforcements before they could reach him. Still, he did not pause. He moved through the nexus like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of controlled chaos. Every strike, every reroute, every disruption flowing seamlessly into the next. The queen's frustration grew, transforming into disbelief as she realized that one human flawed, mortal, fragile, yet utterly unyielding, had brought her entire citadel to the brink of collapse without so much as drawing a blade of her own blood. And then came the moment she had dreaded most. Arik accessed the fleet's command matrix, the neural interface connecting every cruiser, frigate, and fighter to her will. It pulsed beneath his touch, alive with psychic feedback, yet he felt no fear, only focus. Because humans had learned to thrive in environments where failure was fatal. With deliberate care, he introduced subtle distortions, small enough to avoid immediate detection, but powerful enough to spread like a virus, causing fleet movements to misalign, targeting systems to crossfire, and morale to fracture as soldiers struggled to comprehend why their orders were failing. From orbit, the humans' orbital fleet watched, waiting for the signal, but it wasn't needed yet. Arik was the signal. He was the proof that humanity could not only resist, but dominate through intellect, creativity, and sheer stubbornness. The queen roared, her voice amplified through psychic projectors to every corner of the citadel, demanding his capture, execution, or death by any means necessary. But her orders arrived too late, misinterpreted by her own confused officers, and executed with hesitation. Panic rippled through the ranks, and where there had been arrogance, there was now fear. Soldiers whispered the same thing to each other. He is not mortal, he is not human, he cannot be stopped. Arik, hearing it faintly through intercepted comms, allowed himself a faint smirk. The perception of invincibility was as deadly as the reality. That was the essence of humanity's power, not superior strength, not superior technology, but indomitable will. By the time night fell over the citadel, Arik had seized control of the communication matrix entirely. From his position, he could see, through feeds, the confusion spread to every fleet commander in orbit. He sent a single, simple message, not of surrender, not of threat, but of warning. The Earth will not yield. Every Veskari ship, every warrior, every officer paused, hesitated, recalculated, and that hesitation was all he needed. He turned to face the queen finally, stepping out of the shadows of the Nexus chamber into the open floor where she had come, herself to observe the collapse of her empire. Her wings were spread wide, claws glinting in the dim violet light, fangs bared in a snarl of defiance, yet even she could not conceal the fear creeping into her gaze. "How?" she hissed. "Can one human do this?" Arik did not answer immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of the entire citadel bear down upon her. "Because one human," he said finally, voice calm, unwavering, "never fights alone. One human is every human who has ever defended their home, their family, their world. One human carries the ingenuity, adaptability, and stubbornness of an entire species. That is why you cannot stop me, and that is why you will fail." Her eyes flared, psychic energy crackling as she reached for her most powerful attack, a surge meant to crush his mind and body simultaneously. Arik, anticipating the move, leapt aside, ducking through the doorway of the Nexus just as the blast ripped through the chamber, leaving nothing behind but twisted metal and smoldering stone. Outside, the fleet trembled, unable to recalibrate fast enough. Arik pushed further, using the Nexus to trigger defensive measures across the city. creating zones of controlled destruction that hindered the Queen's ability to coordinate even the simplest tactical maneuvers. Civilians and conscripted soldiers were evacuated by automated systems he repurposed. Infrastructure remained largely intact, proof that he was not merely a destroyer, but a strategist, ensuring maximum disruption with minimal collateral damage. By dawn, the citadel was in chaos, but no human had yet fired a shot. No blood from Arik's side had fallen outside his own bruises and scratches. The Queen realized, as she stood atop her throne, observing her empire crumble around her, that she had underestimated the core principle of humanity: adaptability. Arik had moved faster, thought differently, and refused to conform to predictable patterns. He had turned every advantage the Veskari possessed into a liability, every predictable instinct against them, and every resource they had assumed would guarantee control into tools for his own manipulation. Her fleet remained massive, her warriors elite, her psychic prowess unmatched, but none of it mattered because one human had demonstrated what they could not predict: the will to survive and the creativity to exploit weaknesses no one else saw. Arik's presence alone had changed the battlefield, turning it into an extension of his mind. The Queen sent wave after wave of troops to subdue him directly, but each attempt failed with precision that bordered on prescience, not because he was superhuman, but because he was human, trained to see the patterns, anticipate failure, and improvise in ways a species bred for rigid discipline could not. Hours later, Arik finally activated the central override. Fleet weapons were locked in place. Shield grids oscillated. Communications looped infinitely. The Veskari's orbital forces were paralyzed, unable to fire, unable to respond effectively. Arik allowed himself a breath, knowing that when the humans arrived from orbit, they would find a citadel intact, an enemy frozen in place, and the legend of one human alone holding back an entire invasion firmly established. The Queen realized what had happened before her own eyes. She could feel it, even without the tactical feeds. Humanity had not been stopped by force, by numbers, by terror. It had been stopped by one human refusing to surrender, refusing to falter, refusing to yield. Arik approached the throne, not with weapons, not with threats, but with the calm authority of a man who had earned victory by every measure of skill, patience, and courage. "Your empire is intact," he said quietly, "but your fleet is neutralized, your command structure disrupted, and your soldiers uncertain. You may survive this day, but your pride has been shattered." Varash glared, fury and disbelief warring in her expression. "You dare lecture me, human?" "I dare survive," he replied. The Queen hissed, tail flicking, claws scraping the floor, but even her mightiest attack would now serve no purpose. Outside, human ships descended, taking positions to secure the citadel and the planet, but their victory was already guaranteed not by firepower, not by numbers, but by the actions of a single soldier whose ingenuity and resolve had made all the difference. As she realized the depth of her failure, Varash looked at him and, for the first time, acknowledged a truth she had never considered. One human, even alone, could hold back the might of her species, and in that acknowledgement, a quiet, reluctant respect took root. Arik did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood, chest heaving, eyes scanning every corner, every hidden threat, every possibility, ready for the next move, but knowing this battle, the one that mattered most, was already won. Humanity had sent one soldier. He had faced an alien queen, a planet of warriors, and the full might of a technologically superior species, and he had held back the invasion alone, proving that the greatest weapon of any species was not its fleets, its weapons, or its psychic power, but its courage, ingenuity, and indomitable will. And as he looked toward the horizon, toward the approaching ships that would finally secure the planet and the citadel, Arik understood what humans had always known. It was never about size, speed, or strength. It was about persistence, adaptability, and refusing to break. And that, he knew, was why humanity would endure.